Okay. So welcome everybody. And Chief, I think you can, this is a little bit different this morning or this evening, sorry, because we're just going to start off with Chief introducing the meeting and calling to orders.
All right, let's go ahead and welcome everybody tonight. Thanks for being here, and let's go ahead and take a roll call.
Okay. So we're going to begin with Joe Piscineri.
Here.
Brittany De Alicante.
Present.
And Barry Lind had previously communicated his Michael Bean.
I'm here.
Isa Avian. Jack Martin.
Here.
Terry Dillon.
Present.
Jen McCauley.
Here.
And Eric Adams.
Here.
Thank you. Roll call complete.
Okay, Jess, our next order of business, the election of the new vice chair, correct?
Correct.
So we're gonna need to elect a new vice chair to chair the meeting tonight because our chair and vice chair are not present. So would anybody like to make a motion to elect a new vice chair?
I would if I could. So I'd like to make a motion to elect Terry Dillon as vice chair, if she would be willing to accept.
Thank you. Yes.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, Terry, you are elected the new vice chair to be the chair of the meeting tonight.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Do we have to have a vote?
Pardon me?
Probably should have a vote real quick.
You're correct.
Technicalities.
Yeah.
All in favor of Terry being the new vice chair, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Terry, you are the new vice chair. Congratulations.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. All right, we'll go ahead. The minutes, can I have an approval on them or a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting? Are there any changes that need to be made?
I move to accept them. They were the most thorough minutes I've ever seen at any meeting I've ever attended.
I second.
Thank you. Looks like that's been approved and that's been passed.
Need to have,
Pardon me?
need to have a vote?
Oh, I guess that's true. We do need votes, don't we?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. May we vote on the meeting? Everybody approve the meeting minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Anybody disapprove? Looks like that's passed. Thank you very much. And next on the agenda is business from the audience. And public testimony will now be received during business from the audience. As a reminder, the meeting is being recorded, so everybody needs to understand that. The committee will listen to your comments, but will not respond to public comment until the committee response portion of the meeting agenda. The meeting minutes will be taken by staff and forwarded to the city manager and city council. Members of the public can always send written testimony to the committee or the city council. As we begin our meeting tonight, I would ask members of the audience to please keep yourself on mute until you're called on to provide public testimony. And public testimony will allow speakers 2 minutes each for a total of 20 minutes. If you're joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak on either of these times, please use the raise hand features to make the request. And you will be called on when it's your turn to speak. Please identify your name, your ward number, and the subject that you'd like to speak about. For people calling in by phone only, you're in listen mode only and you will not be called upon. So we'll go ahead with the first speaker.
Thank you, Terry. We do have one person indicating they would like to speak this evening, and that is Amy Cothran. And Amy, I have enabled your ability to speak. Thank you.
Great, and y'all can hear me?
We can, thank you.
Awesome. First, I would like to say I see the effort to connect with the community, but things like Coffee with a Cop, or whatever y'all called that event, that doesn't really work for a lot of the communities that y'all are trying to reach, because the people that you're trying to reach would not want to have coffee with a cop. You kind of have to go to them. You have to meet them on their levels. Second, having that on the anniversary of the Thurston protest where your department grossly overstepped your power, whether on purpose or not, was a very poor choice. Next is my biggest thing I do want to talk about is back in February, I filed a complaint. After taking way too long to be answered, it was answered by someone who had a conflict of interest as they were working within that incident that day. I did bring it up to Chief Shearer and he did have that investigated. However, he only had the issue of how long it took in the processes for reinvestigated. The investigation for the complaint I made, the huge conflict of interest, the one with forging documents by your department, and the one with colluding with specific community members, that has not been readdressed. My complaint was never investigated by a party that had no interest in clearing the officer on that complaint. So I'd like to ask Chief Shearer, why did you not reinvestigate the complaint, but just the process? Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica, do we have anyone else?
There are no others indicating they'd like to speak this evening.
Okay. All right. Next we have the committee response. So if there are any committee members that would like to share a response, I invite them to do so now.
I think we should hear from the chief because I don't understand exactly what it is.
Yeah, the complaint that Amy Cothran brought forward last time, I pulled that investigation. I reassigned it to somebody that had never been involved with the investigation because the primary complaint that I was given was the complaint was made and then a supervisor that was directly involved in the incident is the one that investigated. So there's a conflict of interest there. So I had the lieutenant that oversees the investigation division review the entire investigation. I didn't find that there was any bias or anything lacking from that investigation, but what I did identify is, and I do agree with Amy, is that there is a conflict of interest there. And so the remedy for that is we've drafted new language in our professional standards policy to ensure that in the future, supervisors that are directly involved in an incident cannot be assigned to investigate that incident to avoid any conflict of interest in the future.
Excellent.
Any other comments?
Carrie?
Yes. Thanks, Joe.
Oh, no problem. So it sounds like it's been completely investigated. It sounds like the remedy has been sought and has been in place. And it sounds like everyone can now and should now move forward. And to me, unless there's something that you see, Chief, that still needs to be done, is that a correct summary of what I understand?
Yes, sir. That is my assessment at this time.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I appreciate you looking into it. And thank you, Amy, for coming in and bringing that up. And it sounds like it's been resolved from our end. And So again, I think it's time to move on, and I appreciate everybody looking into this again, spending more time on it. And it's worth it.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone else? Okay, next is business from the chief. Chief Scherer, you're up.
Sure. I know last time I talked about our staffing shortages, and that's one of the issues that we're facing. So since that time, I'm happy to report that we've done widespread recruiting. We had 124 applicants apply over the course of the last 6 weeks or so. We had our process began about 2 weeks ago. We've since narrowed that down to 11 people from a wide range of community that made it to chiefs interviews. I've been engaging in chiefs interviews yesterday, all day today, and part of the day tomorrow. Once those chiefs interviews are complete, we'll make a determination on to who to do the background investigations on, which is the next phase. And I'm optimistic that we should be able to hire, upwards of 4 people within the next 30 to 45 days, and have more people shortly after that. So I think we're having a lot of success with our recruiting efforts. We're really attracting a diverse group of applicants that really represent all the corners of the Springfield community, and I'm really excited about what the weeks ahead have in store for us. Tuesday of this week, you might be aware, we had the National Night Out events, which I would say were a great success. There were events held by community in Meadow Park, Jesse Main Park, Volunteer Park, and at a person's home on Mansfield Street. Now, I personally was able to attend 3 of those events, and we had officers assigned at all 4. There was a great community turnout. It was a lot of good energy, a lot of people really excited to get out doors and have a face-to-face meet with folks after being locked up for a year and a half because of all the COVID restrictions. So it was a nice event, and I think it was a success. There was a small protest that occurred at Jesse Main Park for a brief period of time. People showed up, they expressed their rights to share their views. They were heard, and they moved on in short order. So that was the only, I think, event that was a little unexpected. We started to hear discussion the night before, specifically about Jesse Main Park, that there were concerns about this event in Jesse Main Park, because that's where one of the protests that resulted in a conflict between police and protesters started at that park approximately a year ago, like a year and several days ago. So there was some concern from some community members about that occurring in that park at that time frame, and I understand that. I hear their concern with that, but the event went on, the protest occurred, and everybody was heard and had a good time. And with that, I know somebody brought up last time that we wanted to hear from somebody from the DA's office related to IDFIT. And so we're fortunate to have Assistant DA Chris Perosa here with us today that can kind of talk a little bit about IDFIT, what they do, who they're comprised of, some of the changes I think that we're going to see made as a result of the Kenny recommendations. So I'm hoping Chris can give us a little update on that.
Excellent. Can you all hear me okay?
We can,
Perfect.
thank you.
Perfect. Well, I am Chris Perosa. I'm a senior prosecutor with the Lane County District Attorney's Office. I've been a prosecutor for 17 years, a little over 15 of those spent here in Lane County. My day-to-day job here in the District Attorney's Office is as a trial team leader and really to provide some assistance directly to Patty Perlow, our elected DA. I can tell you that my role with the IDFIT largely came about as a result of the independent critical incident review that was done on the officer-involved shooting death of Stacy Kenny. When that report came out somewhere around the end of March, maybe early April, District Attorney Perlow distributed that to her staff, largely to the team leaders in our office, for our opportunity to review it, digest it, try and make sense of some of the recommendations that Mr. Janako was ultimately was making for the IDFIT team, and changes to our protocols that he was recommending. And then we got together Patty Perlow and I got together and decided that after review that there were a number of recommendations that were made for changes to the IDFIT policy that ultimately made some sense to us. And so we Patty Perlow at that point decided to initiate a work group to ultimately begin to discuss whether or not protocol changes were necessary and what kind of changes we would be making if we choose to make some. We reached out at that point to Mr. Giannacco and invited him to our work group session. He came to that session that we had in early June and gave us input, kind of some feedback regarding the various recommendations and kind of where he was headed with a number of them, so that we could have greater clarification as we began to discuss the changes that we thought might be prudent under our protocols. It was my understanding that at that time, Mr. Giannacco had not actually reviewed the protocols that we had in place. He'd seen our deadly force plan and some of the other documents associated with the IDFIT group, but he had not actually seen our protocol. So we, during the course of discussions, pointed out that many of the recommendations, and there were 9 made with regard to the IDFIT, we actually have protocols in place for what he was calling for. One example of that would be his first recommendation, which was for a crime scene log to be kept and maintained during the course of the investigation. We actually have policies on that within the protocols themselves, which highlighted another fact and which caused him to write a supplemental report, which was to say that there were errors that were made during the course of the investigation. And that's a reality that we accept here in this case. We don't, obviously we aren't thrilled when mistakes are being made, but it's clear from the investigation and this independent analysis that yes, the protocols were not followed in several instances. And so we're in the process of trying to not only correct the protocols that exist and trying to make them more precise and then ultimately up to modern policing standards, but we're also in the process of modifying our IDFIT plan so as to require an after action review be done on each and every officer involved shooting, which we think then will provide some critical analysis to the team and point out the various deficiencies in each and every investigation so that we can begin to learn from mistakes and hopefully not make those mistakes going forward again. The chief asked me to talk a little bit about who's comprised of this IDFIT team. We have a sergeant from the Oregon State Police that is ultimately one of the lead investigators. They are designated to be a lead investigator. We have a detective sergeant for the Lane County Sheriff's Office who is also another lead investigator for the team. And then each of the partner agencies in the community, theoretically anyway, is to provide detectives when the team is called out to investigate the case. In an ideal world, each agency within our community would be able to provide a couple of detectives to come out and act as independent investigators into these officer-involved shootings. The involved agency is allowed to have a detective that is a participant in the group. They are not the primary investigative agency. While they may retain some of the evidence during the course of the investigation itself is being led by members of the other police agencies who are investigating the officer-involved shooting or the deadly force incident. So technically, we should be able to call upon basically any of our police agencies in Lane County to provide some assistance when one of these deadly force events happens. Practically speaking, that doesn't always occur because Florence, Oak Ridge, Cottage Grove, some of our smaller agencies like Coburg, they're just not able to afford, they don't have the manpower or might not have people available to them to ultimately send to these officer-involved shootings or deadly force incidents. And so the lion's share of responsibilities generally tend to fall upon our bigger city, municipality, police departments, and then Lane County and the Oregon State Police to ultimately pick up and take the investigation. So I'm happy to discuss, certainly if anyone has questions, kind of the things, what recommendations from Mr. Janako's report that we are looking to change protocols on, or field any questions that the group may have.
Well, I want to thank you for that. I know Patty, and I think she's a great DA, having worked with Doug Harkle and Alex. I don't think this could have got done without Patty. And thank you, Chris. So I'm impressed. I'd like to see that go forward. That's pretty terrific.
Well, I thank you, and I do got to give her a lot of credit. I mean, she immediately read the report, and before sending it out to the rest of us, kind of, I think immediately her reflexive attitude towards it was, there are legitimate changes that can be made here to better our investigations and provide greater faith from the community in the investigations that we ultimately produce. And that's what we're trying to do, is make them as transparent and as thorough as possible so that people in the community can feel good about the investigations that we are generating.
Yeah, just being open to that feedback, accepting and then initiating those recommendations in the DA's office is huge, and it happened pretty quickly too. So I'm sorry, Joe, you got your hand up. I think.
No, that's fine, but I'm not sure. Brittany, you did your virtual hand up, and I don't know
Oh,
what
I
the
see.
timing
Yeah,
was. So
a lot of virtual.
I think Jen actually had her hand up before me, so if you want to go, Jen.
and then there's Jenna. Okay.
There's a lot of hands. But no, I'm just wondering, in terms of like the investigators who don't follow protocols, is there like repercussions for that? Or what happens if the protocols are laid out and you don't do them?
That's an excellent question. There's nothing within our policies and procedures that ultimately punish, for so to speak, officers for not following the protocols. However, the idea, and one of the reasons why we want to implement an after action review in every single one of these cases, is so that we can generate a report that ultimately highlights each and every time the mistakes that are being made. These documents then, of course, becoming public record, subject to being put out to the media and to the public at large to ultimately see that mistakes, if mistakes are routinely being made, you know, we can allow you to shed some light on that as well. And the idea is that, you know, if police agencies or individual police officers who are involved in these investigations ultimately do not continue to not follow the protocols, there's going to be public embarrassment and potentially calls for changes of membership, meaning they won't be a part of the IDFIT going forward. So the hope is that we can, by casting light on where we follow procedures or policies or best practices, ultimately shed some light on it for you guys and for the public at large. Then there'll be initiative taken from the independent investigators that are a part of the team, but also their administrations, to make sure that we are getting the best people and they are doing the correct job while they're on the team.
Yeah. And are they, sorry if you mentioned this before, but are they nominated by the DA? Is that how people become?
No, they are not. Each agency has the ability to essentially assign people to the team, and they generally tend to be people who are in detective units, so they have investigative experience and have the availability to be called out at all times of night, and you know, so we have most of members of the team I have met throughout the years, and they are some of our most seasoned and experienced detectives who do a fantastic job, I can tell you.
Thank you.
I guess Jenna would be next.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for updating us on where your agency, the DA's office, the IDFIT team is at in sort of continuing that self-evaluation process. I actually was going to just take us one step back a little bit, because I think that this particular committee is at least sort of familiar with IDFIT and what it would even stand for. But part of the reason that I had actually initially posed the question about hearing from you was to help our community understand. At our last meeting, we received a lot of questions around officer involved shootings and how and why and when, specifically in this case, Springfield Police was going to release information. And I thought it might be nice to hear just that higher level overview to set the stage for the community to understand that this team is the primary investigation unit, not the involved agency itself, and how that impacts when and how information is released. Because that was kind of the question that came up last time.
Excellent. That is a very good point. I should have started from the beginning, and so I thank you for asking the question. So what essentially happened was the law years ago, the law had changed so that it required that each county put together a deadly physical force planning authority that consisted of, and then it listed a number of the participating people that were supposed to be on this planning authority. DA's office was obviously one of them, and then various police agencies were also a part of it, and then there's community member and some other folks that are involved. Our planning authority got together and they created a plan. The plan ultimately created and I always have to look at the language to ultimately get it right, an interagency deadly force investigations team. That's IDFIT, essentially. That's the acronym. IDFIT comes from that. So they created that. From there, we created some protocols for these investigations. And that originally occurred way back in, I want to say it was like 2008. We've largely been operating under the same protocols since then. The way the IDFIT team generally works is that officers are obviously out on the street as we speak. They may be involved in a circumstance wherein they are forced to use deadly force, or they use deadly force, and I'm not going to make a comment on whether or not they were forced to do so or not, but they use deadly force. When that situation happens, we have collectively as a county and as a deadly force planning authority have essentially said that when your officers from your agency ultimately get involved in a deadly force situation, you will enact by the IDFIT team to come in and investigate that case. So they then, their role goes from being essentially the investigating agency of whatever this incident that happened on the streets ultimately was, to they take kind of a backseat to the IDFIT, which comes in then and takes over the investigation. But I want to caution, we have a very limited role as the IDFIT team to what we investigate. We are there largely to investigate, or solely to investigate, whether or not the use of force by that officer in the instance was justified or not. If it wasn't justified, then we may choose to go forward with criminal charges against that officer. If it was, and we later deem it was justified, then obviously no criminal charges will come against the officer at a later time. We are not investigating whatever the underlying crime was that happened at the street level. So if a person was involved in a robbery and during the course of the robbery had confrontation with a police officer and the police officer shot the suspect, we're not going to investigate the robbery. That's not our role in the process. It's to determine whether or not the officer was actually justified in the shooting of that suspect at the time and under the circumstances in which the shooting occurred. These investigations can take a long time. in part because collecting evidence, you're having other agencies collect evidence like body cam video, in-car video. We have to go around and find surveillance video. I mean, we live in a world of technology now. And so one of the things that we immediately assign somebody to do is to go around to the local area and look for surveillance video to collect all the reports from the various officers who may be charged with going out and having interviews of people who were witnesses to the event, including involved officers. Just collecting, like any other criminal investigation, we collect all the information. That's the responsibility of the primary investigators. Usually it's the Oregon State Police and the Lane County Sheriff's Office. They collect all that information, and then they literally bring it to us in the form of a case file. And it's at that point that we sit back down with the information and comb it and make sure that we understand it thoroughly. If we don't understand certain aspects of it, we ask additional questions to the investigators. Or if we see that some additional follow-up needs to be made, we may make requests of them to ultimately follow up on something that maybe got missed or was overlooked. And then we make a decision. It falls upon the district attorney, in this case, Patty Perlow, to make a decision as to whether or not the conduct of the officer in the instance in which they used deadly force was justified or not. And so that process, I understand the frustration that comes from the community, because it's a frustration we deal with routinely from people, that they just don't understand why it takes so long for information to come out on these cases. And we recognize they are of supreme community interest, these officer involved shootings or deadly force incidents. But we are trying to, like we would with any major investigation, we are not trying to ultimately let information leak out ahead of any decisions being made, because we're often afraid that it will tarnish the investigation going forward. For example, we've had situations in major crimes cases in the past, I know I've been a part of them, wherein information creeps out to the community, and then the witnesses that we want to ultimately go out and interview to follow up and finish the investigation are tainted by the information they've read in the newspaper or seen on some television report in the evening. So we try and keep things as tightly held as possible, so that we can maintain the integrity of the investigation until we get to the point where we make a decision. And that just takes time. I don't know how else to say it. It just takes time. And it takes even more time when you consider that the ordinary process for report writing and things like that is that a street level cop would submit a report whenever they get the time to write a report to a sergeant who approves the report. And then that report gets sent in to the district attorney's office or to the agency records department. Here we have a whole nother level of bureaucracy that we have to travel, because not only does that person have to submit their report to their agency for approval, but then they have to send it on to the agency that ultimately is in charge of the investigation and gathering all the information up. And then that primary investigator's got to put together essentially a coherent book of information that they can present to the district attorney's office, so that we can hopefully as easily and as quickly as possible digest it and make the pertinent decisions we need to make. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. I think that was one of the questions that our community was posing to Springfield Police, was how come we don't have a little more information on a couple of these incidents that had occurred recently? And I was curious, and I had a sort of tertiary knowledge of the IDFIT team, but I was anxious to hear that that's kind of outside of, and we want it to remain outside of the involved agency, to make sure that that is as clean as possible, so that we're getting appropriate.
Yes, it's intentionally designed to be that way. So while the involved agency has the ability to have a detective who is assigned to them, they usually play a much lesser role in the actual investigation of the deadly force incident. they are not also supposed to be doing things like interviewing involved witness officers. That's a role that falls to another agency to do. So yes, the design is to ultimately have other agencies investigate the deadly force incident of a particular agency. And so, and the protocols are all about that, keeping the separation and ultimately making sure that there isn't the potential for things like collusion between witnesses, officer involved witnesses, and things like that. Eric, I believe I could see your hand up.
Oh, thanks, Chris. When you were providing your initial explanation of how the program works and the expectations of membership, I think you had mentioned that if the protocols, were violated or routinely violated by, members of IDFIT, that they could be at risk of being disqualified or forfeiting their membership. So I was curious, other than that happening, what consequence would be involved with that? Is there a regulatory or liability implication from that?
Not necessarily is what I'll say. The reality is that the problem with these IDFIT teams and dealing with the agencies themselves is each agency is its own governing body. Springfield Police Department's its own governing body, and it's got a bunch of policies and procedures that it ultimately has to follow. And it has things like its own contract and union rules that it has to adhere to during the course of the policy. So there's certain things the district attorney's office as kind of a lead, if you want to think of it that way, a lead agency in the deadly force planning authority. We certainly have some input on some of these things, but we can't dictate to Springfield Police Department who they put on the IDFIT team. We can, if we see routine problems coming from detectives from Springfield Police Department, we can talk to the chief of police and say, look, we think we got a problem with this person. They are routinely violating the various protocols. And I think it would be wise if we got a new member to the team instead of that investigator. But that's about the best we can do, because it really is up to Chief Shearer to determine who from his agency ultimately will be a participant in the IDFIT team. It's not up to the district attorney's office. We hope, and the reason Patty Perlow has ultimately decided that let's do after action reports is, if we put out there routinely a report that says we did good here, here, and here, but we blew this, that's going to be out in the public record, and those agencies are going to ultimately see that, try and, we hope and we trust, because we believe in Chief Skinner, we believe in Sheriff Harold, we believe in Chief Shearer and the like, that they are going to want to be providing the best representation of their agency possible in these most important investigations, and they will for themselves kind of self-regulate who they're putting on this team. This is, officer involved shootings or deadly force incidents involving officers are perhaps the biggest, the most political cases that we deal with in the criminal justice system, and rightfully so. So everyone's mindful that we want to be doing the best job possible, and we do not want to be called to the carpet for bad police work or bad prosecution on these cases, because they mean a lot to the community who we are all beholden to, and we should be beholden to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Joe, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Hey, so I'm gonna ask some questions that I'm not trying to call anybody on the carpet, but just challenging some things, and I think it may raise some questions or hopefully some relief to some people, but maybe some improvement down the road. So you talked about the 9 issues that you were taken to task with on that report, and that you identified, and I read the report thoroughly, and frankly, there were some of them there that kind of was jaw-dropping for me.
Mhm.
that occurred. And again, I'm not trying to be critical, but I was quite surprised as to some of the things that were not done, and some things that were done were really elementary in my mind. And so that being said, because it cost the city a lot of money, that whole incident. And so I'm looking at different ways to have, any way possible we can help prevent that or mitigate that.
Yeah.
And looking at those, and it was brought up earlier in regards to, okay, so there's some room for improvement, as with anytime you get a group of people together and trying to do one task, there's going to be errors.
Mhm.
Mostly minor, should be just minor, should be just administrative. But it was brought up earlier as far as if you have some errors that are identified, and there's really it doesn't sound like there's any real checks and balances when it comes to, okay, we got these errors and you folks identified them, the report writer identified them, we acknowledged them, they happened, and now you looked at your own protocols and your plan, which by the way was early 2007. And for people's edification, they have to take that to all the entities for approval, municipalities. Eugene didn't approve it until March of 2008. So it took 14 months to make its way through to get the last final approval. So there's an example of how government time clock is such a slow ticker. So, but all that's in this whole plan is in response to Senate Bill 111 that gave each county the authority to assemble these plans. So that all being said, with the history is, the question is, or the comment is, and you hit on it, what you found the errors, and it sounded like there was errors that were made that were already in the plan. So was it because there was not enough on-site or direct supervision by the lead investigators of the investigators to point these out as they occur and say, okay, stop, you need to go back and do this? I mean, it seems like there's a disconnect there of that oversight.
Right. And so let me just say that no investigation is ever perfect. When you have humans running an investigation, ultimately mistakes are going to be made. And any investigation, the bigger it gets, the more likely mistakes are going to exist within an investigation. But let me give you an example of one of the recommendations that was given, where I think there's some explanation potentially for why the protocol was missed in this case. The first recommendation that Mr. Giannacco made to the IDFIT team was ultimately that the IDFIT should improve its protocols to require each agency maintain a crime scene log after an officer-involved shooting that occurs in its jurisdiction. Elemental to any criminal investigation. And we would expect that would happen in every IDFIT call out, for sure. This was a pretty unique circumstance because of a couple factors. Number one, you had at least 4 Springfield officers that were involved in this. You had the shooting officer and at least 3 witness officers to this event that were involved at some level with hands-on contact with Mr. Kenny. That was a large percentage of the people who were actually on duty for Springfield that night. So instead of being able to quarantine them off, which is another recommendation that was made by Mr. Giannacco, that those people should have been immediately separated and interviewed independently, and all the things that are aspirational in these protocols. And I think, in the ordinary case, that would be totally appropriate and able to handle. Springfield didn't have the ability to just call those people off or send them back to the station, because they only had so many people who could hold the crime scene during the course of the time in which it took for the IDFIT partners, many of whom were coming from home at different locations around the community, to come in and actually begin the investigation. The second problem that existed in this Kenny investigation was, you're talking about a crime scene that was over a mile long, because this incident starts back on the roadway, as you may remember, and the car begins to roll with the officer that was engaged in the shooting in the car with the deceased as it went, and they traveled a long distance. So there was a lot of ground to ultimately cover to maintain the crime scene, which made it even more necessary for Springfield to ultimately use the people that were there and available to them to ultimately maintain the scene. But then it also prohibited them from being able to start a crime scene log at that time, because it was such a large crime scene and there were so many people around the scene that were there, that I think it kind of inhibited their ability to start that most basic of processes in this case. We acknowledge there should be a crime scene log in this, and we should have done a better job. I've talked to the two sergeants that were in charge of that investigation, and they agree. There should have been an effort at a minimum at the time that the IDFIT had boots on the ground there to start a crime scene log. It didn't get done. And that was a mistake they made. And ultimately they acknowledged that mistake. And I think going forward, I don't expect to see that one made again.
Thank you. So, in answer to that, I mean, and obviously I wasn't there, you weren't there, but I'm curious though, because, you know, there's a thing called mutual aid that is in place, and or a through use of MOUs, and perhaps as a suggestion is that the command staff, the different agencies can trigger the mutual aid and call on a separate agency to provide personnel to that crime scene so they can cover what Springfield couldn't cover. A call to Eugene Police at that time saying, hey, I need 5 officers down here now. And I would venture to say that through mutual aid agreements or through an MOU, that would have happened within minutes. So I mean, that's something.
And I agree with you. And it's my understanding of this case that actually Springfield did reach out to Eugene Police Department, and Eugene Police Department did send some, I don't know how many, units to the area to ultimately relieve some of the involved officers and things of that nature. Again, the problem with the mutual aid agreement is the protocol specifically requires, as they are currently instituted, and maybe we need to make some changes to that language as well, that it be the jurisdiction in which the officer who was involved in the shooting ultimately begin the crime scene log. And I think the chaos of that situation and the very real understanding they needed some additional assistance may have played into kind of that step getting missed along the way. It's not an excuse, and I don't want to pretend like it is. It should have been done, and it wasn't. So
yeah, and I know I told you I prefaced my comments with I'm not trying to put thumbs down on anybody or hammer down anything. I'm just, with my experience too, is I'm trying to be helpful. And I think that if that part you mentioned, because it's not necessarily in the protocols, is I think that if that's clarified, it would be helpful into the future, because you and I both know, everybody knows, the chief knows, in a shooting, everything becomes chaos.
Yes.
You know, so I get that. So if it's predictable, it's preventable. So with that being said, then, so I'm wondering too, is I wrote some notes. So you mentioned that the agency has the ability to have the agency that had their staff use the deadly force is allowed to have an investigator in on the IDFIT team. And I'm wondering, I mean, I heard what you're saying earlier about their hands-on, or how much are they allowed to be involved in it, et cetera. But then let me ask you, now this is a homicide investigation, and that in a investigation of any criminal activity of an officer, let's say, for example, there's an officer of some agency accused of a crime, during an internal investigation, and that internal investigation is halted and it's turned over to another police agency for investigation for possible criminal charges, there is no protocol that I'm ever aware of or have heard of that any member, in fact, it may be violation of that officers' contractual agreements or union agreements to have anybody, not union, but through their defense, their criminal defense, to have anybody in that agency have any finger in that investigation whatsoever. So
Right.
I'm trying to figure out if it's a homicide investigation, which is the highest crime possible, but yet there's still the allowance of a representative of the agency / officer that's being investigated. It seems to me that it throws some shadow of doubt in my mind, and even though it probably won't occur, but it seems like it would be easier to say, yeah, we're totally clean, as opposed to, yeah, we're totally clean. And yeah, we know how this person is from the same agency, but it's okay. We make sure he does everything correct. And then there's protocols that haven't been followed completely to the T in the past. So it seems as though it'd be safer for Ms. Perlow to have nobody from the investigated officer's agency even remotely attached to the team.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate the impression on that one for sure. The part of the reason why traditionally we've had a representative, and it's usually one detective from the agency of the involved shooter or deadly force officer, has been number one, a manpower thing. The other agencies aren't necessarily able to call in endless numbers of people to come and investigate one of these events at the drop of a hat, because they have their own staffing issues and things of that nature. The second has been that officer often acts as a conduit to the evidence that the agency inherently has, the involved officer's agency. They inherently have all the body cam video, they have the in-car video, they have maybe pictures or whatever the case may be. And one way to act to get that easily over to the primary investigator in the IDFID is to have a conduit between the records department, the property and evidence unit, and the lead investigator from another agency. And so that's been helpful in many cases to be able to quickly turn around evidence and get OSP can get Springfield Police Department's evidence in an expedited manner rather than having to go and make a request of the chief or one of his lieutenants or a captain to ultimately turn over what information. The other thing is that those officers from the agency inside know what kind of capabilities their particular agency has. One of the biggest problems we face in criminal justice right now is that we fight this thing where discovery evidence that exists in a case doesn't ultimately get turned over in a timely manner. And part of the time it's because the district attorney doesn't know it even exists. And the police agency sometimes, maybe the lead investigator or detective who's handling the case hasn't necessarily checked in to make sure that all the information that they know of that exists in the matter was actually sent by the records department over to the district attorney's office to ultimately turn over to a defense attorney. So having somebody on the inside of Springfield Police Department in this case that knows what capabilities you have. Do you have body cams at this time? You didn't. Do you have in-car video? Do you have these other things? And who do I go to get these things from right away so that we can get the video, for example, in our hands immediately, has been helpful in the past. They take a lesser role. They're not in charge of interviewing the suspect officer, if that's what you want to call them. They most of the time they don't even do any of the interviewing of the witness officers. They take a role of the help with some of the crime scene stuff and kind of just provide a lending hand and then act as a conduit with the agency. I understand your point. I'm certainly happy to talk with Patty about this, and then we're going to reconvene as a work group for the IDFIT in short order. I will bring this up to them because I understand the public perception on this, and I don't disagree with you.
Oh, thank you. No, again, I'm bringing it up because I'm trying to look from, I hear from a lot of folks because of my position, I get deluged with things, but I also have the luxury of having some knowledge of that system. And I'm just bringing up things where there could be some possible solutions. And frankly, Chris, if you look at it and you decide for whatever reasons it's best to be where it's at and everything like that, then we can both say, we did look at this and these are the reasons why we put it in place. And that in itself adds credibility to where you're at, as opposed to not answering this question or not thoroughly looking at that as an option to no longer do. And
I agree with you, Joe, 100%. I think it's worth a discussion by the work group to ultimately talk about the pros and cons. And, once we have a discussion about the pros and cons and make a decision, we can articulate that to the rest of the community. Here's why we came to the decision we ultimately did. And if need be, we lay out the pros and cons on that to them.
And it could be, and it could be in court, the reason why you didn't,
Right, it could be. I mean,
Yes.
Ultimately it could be.
And those meetings are also open to the public, I believe by law, if I looked at that Senate bill correctly. So I'm just looking for total open, educating people. There's a lot of things people are not educated about or unknowing. And I appreciate, Chris, I've known you for many years and you are of the highest credibility as far as I'm concerned. And I appreciate you sharing everything that you have tonight. It certainly is very helpful, I think. I'm just speaking for I can't speak for the group, and I'm speaking for you. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Joe.
Thanks for indulging me.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, unless there's anything else, I guess I'll step away and let you guys continue your meeting. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Bet.
Okay, moving on. We have business from the committee now, and one of those issues is upcoming committee vacancies. We have 3 now that are coming up. As we all know, Johnny has left our committee or our council, and so that will need to be addressed. We also have Jack, our friend Jack, his term is up next week, it looks like, as well as I believe it's Issa is also up in October. So we have 3 coming up.
I have a point of order. Issa hasn't been here in months, and I believe if you miss 2 meetings,
True.
We should be replaced. So maybe we should look.
We can do hers right away too. That is correct.
And if I can butt in, sorry.
Please.
Michael, we're actually looking at that, and I believe these committees are going to be council appointments, so we're going to put that on the fast track.
Thank you.
So, yeah, very aware of that, and was just working in the background.
Oh, well, a little transparency.
You weren't around for the last 2 months, no.
All right, anything else on that?
I have a quick question in terms of what does, and maybe Jessica would know, what does recruitment for those positions generally look like?
Jessica, do you want to?
I'm happy to help. The city actually changed the process just last fall. So just for your information, so there is kind of a fresh process. But what we did was coordinate the available vacancies with the city recorder, and she coordinated the initial publication of the available different committee spots throughout the city. And the city did have an initiative to publicize those, as well as each department. We really tried to reach out to not just on like our social media, of course, we used our existing channels, but then we reached out to different groups that we're aware of and tried to leverage people like yourself just to get the availability out into the community, ask you to pass it on, and make sure that we update, what the committee is about, do decent summary, try to make sure people are aware and just try to get people interested and put their application in. So that really is it in a quick nutshell. And so one of the reasons, not only was it apparent that there was some vacancies coming up, but that we just wanted to make sure that everyone was thinking of that. And we will be putting together some reference documentation that you could put out to people that you know. But in addition, and it may not be the prettiest thing, but it's down and dirty and the information's there on that SPAC website or webpage and we will try to give that a fresh look as well. But we'll get that just get some reference information out there so that people who are interested could take a look. So does that kind of answer it?
Is that still going to come up on the city webpage and all of that there's those vacancies?
Yes, the city does a notice regarding each availability within the different committees that they have. There's the boards, committees and commissions. That said, we also try to make sure to feature this particular committee just because we have more information available about it. So yeah.
So you said this is his last meeting?
Yes.
It is.
Jack, you're going. Thank you for all the years. You've been here forever, 8, 12 years. I mean, and never misses. Well, he did miss once, and now you're just gone. There's no closure. And then Johnny left.
Johnny left, yeah.
Yeah, like we should throw a COVID party or something on Zoom.
Yes, we'll miss both Johnny and Jack.
I'll go to council and double your wages. Then I can double mine at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jack. I've learned a lot from you in the past several years.
Yes, Jack, you've been a wealth of information. Thank you for all of your help and information.
It's been fun to informational all the way around.
Well, it's certainly been a pleasure to have you on the council, and I appreciate you.
Well, we appreciate you too, as council, from the council, that we appreciate all of our volunteers and all the people in our committee members, and for your service, and especially your length of service has been great, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I just got to chime in on Jack real quick, if I can, just for a second. I've only been here a short time, but Jack has been a figure at the police precinct every week since I've been here. He's here at, I don't know, at least 6 a.m., maybe earlier, greeting all the officers as they come into work and helping them get their cars ready. He's just, he's outstanding. I can't speak highly enough about Jack, and I'm super fortunate to have you around just in the short time I've been here.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other member information that anybody wants to pass on or talk about?
If I may,
Yes.
I realize it's not really my turn to share, but I had information just today that I thought was good, is that in regards to virtual meetings, though we did get information from the city that those will continue to at least October, and they're going to regroup and get some more information out at that time. So I realize that would be an area of interest. I just wanted to give you the most recent update.
Certainly is. Thanks, Jessica. I know I'd ask you about that at one point, so I'm glad you got some more information on it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
Well, I can give you an update. My neighborhood is quiet. I've been working with the Oregon Health Authority on a new response to the Delta variant. And you're very wise to postpone through October, because you're going to see some things skyrocket like you haven't. I suggested they don't call that COVID anymore. They call it the Delta variant. It's going to be some bad news. And so that's a game changer. And the state of Oregon is flush with money. They got more money than they know what to do with. And they're under some timelines to disperse a lot of that money. So we've created a new organization with Whitebird and Chrysalis and Willamette Family and us and Looking Glass and St. Vinny's. We've created a new organization to help get that money and funnel it out to people who need it in a quick way. There's so much. So good things are going to happen. I just hope it goes to all the right places. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Meeting is going. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
Please. That's all right.
I was kind of noodling on something since the start of this meeting, and I apologize because it looks like Amy popped off, and I just wanted to take a pause and say that I appreciated her comment, acknowledging the work of the department to sort of get back out in the community now that, although in light of Michael's comments, we may have to pause on that a little as well. But I was wondering, Jessica or Chief, what the best way for a community that has suggestions on how to help interface with the police department, what's the best way for folks like Amy to get you that information if they're aware of ways that they think might actually work in connecting the department and the community that they serve or we all serve? If you guys have a recommendation on how I should submit that or how we can submit that if we have ideas.
Yeah, that's a great point. There is an email link on our website. So any message that gets funneled to that email link, goes to Wendy Poland, my executive assistant, and then she distributes them throughout the organization to the appropriate person. That's a great way to get a hold of us. Through Jessica, I mean, everybody here knows how to get a hold of Jessica. So if you get word from the community and they got great ideas and how we can better connect, heck, they can call the front desk of the precinct and say they just want to share something with us, and the message will get to us. So I absolutely welcome any and all ideas on better ways to connect. And it is a challenge. It has been for the last year and a half with COVID. It seems like it's still going to continue to be a challenge, at least in person, but we're always excited about exploring new options in that area.
Hey, thanks. I apologize I didn't get to ask that while Amy was here to see if she had any additional suggestions.
Okay.
Eric has his hand up, Terry.
Thank you. Eric, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, just a couple of info share items, I guess. One is just wanted to say thank you to Chief Sheriff and the department for their support in helping Willamette deal with some behavior issues at Willamette Park Skate Park in the last couple of months. Had kind of a peak in disruptive behavior and really even some criminal conduct there, and really appreciate the support of their patrol officers and helping us get a handle on that. Things have calmed down, thankfully, and we're in the process of getting some additional resources in place out there to hopefully keep that in that format going forward. The other is, speaking of additional resources, we coordinated recently with the various park agencies in the region, City Eugene Parks and Open Space, Linn County Parks, and ourselves, and then the respective law enforcement agencies to put out a PSA about kind of a noticeable increase, at least within our system, of car break-ins at some of our trailheads and parks. We've put out some new signage at several of our trailheads and parks, alerting people to that risk and encouraging them to secure their vehicles in their car, not leave stuff out in the open, and just be mindful about their surroundings. Unfortunately, it's a reality, and we have seen a pretty good increase in that in the last year. So just want to share that and encourage you to spread that word of mouth, and hopefully we can reduce the number of unfortunate victims in those crimes. So otherwise, on a positive note, children's celebrations this Saturday down Island Park. Bring your kids.
Yeah, I'll be seeing you there bright and early.
I just have a really quick thing, kind of related to Jenna's point earlier. Sorry, my puppy's going to try to make an appearance today in our meeting. But I'm wondering if we can incorporate into the agenda time for questions after Chief Shearer gives his updates, because I like want to ask questions, but we move along really quick, and I know we have a lot to cover a lot of the time, but it would be awesome if we could maybe like incorporate a pause there, so we can be sure to address some questions.
It's a great idea. Yes, we'll get that done.
Well, Brittany, he's used to people interrupting him right in the middle of his and saying, "Hey, wait a second."
Interrupt more.
Yeah, wait a second, Chief. Can you stop right there? Let's.
Yeah.
No, really, I don't think it's. I mean, yeah, I totally get the pause after that and everything, but it's usually there's always definitely don't hold back on asking staff questions for sure.
Oh, that's a polite thing to do because I interrupt all the time. I got to work on that. Really nice.
No, you don't, Mike. No, come on. No, you don't.
Trying to lower my alpha and bring up my beta.
Well, that energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. All right, anything else from the group? Jessica, are we ending this meeting at 7:11 p.m.?
I'm sorry, I got a question, so I'll jump in there.
Good.
Chief, I wanted to ask you, in all sincerity, it's been a roller coaster ride for your department for the last 4 months. How's morale? I mean, every month it seems to get banged up a little.
Yeah, morale's a tough one. I mean, that's a moving target. You can have somebody have a great day, and then the next day they'll tell you morale's lower than it's ever been. It'll bounce right back the next day. And there's just so many factors that go into that. It's tough. I'd say the biggest impact on morale here, the negative impact on morale here is just our staffing issue, because people are just so overworked and long hours, and then it just really takes its toll. But what swings it back the other way is the continual support that the members of the organization feel from this community. And there's just so many communities out there, unfortunately, that where officers don't feel that. Now, we're not perfect. It has been a roller coaster. There's a lot going on, but the community here generally does outwardly support the police department. I think that is really what helps morale stay at a good level. Without that, we'd really be in a tough spot.
Yeah, and I want to add with that. Mike, are you done? Or Michael?
I'm done.
Okay. I was there at Jesse, Maine for the National Night Out festivities, so to speak, and I concur. There was I spoke with tons of different citizens. It's in my ward. I knew most of the people there, a lot of the people there. Several different officers showed up. I had a ton of kids out there playing, and the dogs were out there. At one point we had 4 of them swing by for the canine units, and it was such a it was really just a blessing to see that kind of cohesiveness going on and the enjoyment of the officers. The officers were, in my opinion, were not faking anything. They were truly showing enjoyment and connecting with the folks. And people came up after me, after the officers left, commenting how great it was to meet some of them and put a face to the chief's name. So it was a great deal, and I wanted to thank the chief for as his end of things. It was a citizen organized deal. It was not a city thing, and on his end of the National Night Out it was really truly a good thing for the neighborhood.
Yeah, Joe, I experienced the same thing at Meadow Park. We had 3 dogs at one time, and everybody, the kids were just enthralled with those guys.
Oh yeah.
And the officers could not have been nicer to those children and explain things to them and how their dogs worked and all of that. It was great to see and watch.
Yeah.
Definitely those non-enforcement related interactions that cops have that puts a smile on their face and keeps them coming back. It provides that balance in what they have to deal with day in and day out. It's really great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else from the group? I think this is the earliest we've ever adjourned.
But yeah, make note of that.
Yeah, we'll call it at 7:15 p.m.
Is
All right.
the next meeting in September, Jessica? I mean,
Yes.
it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for taking the gavel for tonight, Terry. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate your vote of confidence. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.